Thought it was awesome. And so Metronome reached out to Jeffrey, and Jeffrey was kind enough to come to our group today to share with us. My understanding is that Jeffrey will share for the first 30 minutes as to how the book came about and whatever other kinds of introductory or sharing he wants to do, at which point, plus or minus 30 minutes, at which point the question and answer period will start. And I believe the questions will come to me, and then I will ask them one at a time, so there's not a deluge of questions coming to Jeff. If that's not correct, Courtney, please do let me know. The meeting's locked. Let's see, what else do I need to know? Our regular websites is secularrecoverygroup.org and secularmeetings.com, and those are https:// not World Wide Web. You can find more secular literature there, as well as more secular recovery meetings. And I believe that may be all my introductory comments. So at this point, I will turn the meeting over to Jeffrey, and you are free to share as you wish. And then let me know when you're ready for the question and answer time.
Okay, thanks so much, Dan. My name is Jeff. I'm a recovering addict alcoholic. And I'm really, really grateful to be here. It's really exciting. Um, I am just always happy to hear that something that I've done is helping people feel more at home in the program. I was talking to my wife earlier, and she said something to the effect of like, you know, you're starting a new program or something like that. And I was like, I don't, that's certainly not my goal. My goal was to do for other people what I wanted done for me, which was to help people not feel alienated by the traditional 12-step approach if they didn't have a religious or or theistic worldview. Spiritual is a whole other thing, and you know we can talk about that. I don't use that word a lot because I think it's got a lot of different meanings and connotations. But I a lot of my recovery is based on luck. I had a lot of privileges. I had a lot of luck, and so I don't have pride in my recovery, but I do have a lot of gratitude. I started using actually pretty late compared to many. Around 16, 17, I started using, and primarily it was alcohol, and then it moved on to marijuana, and then it moved on to everything. A lot of drinking, harder drugs, all that jazz. I don't want to go through my drugalog/drunkalog, but I was really sort of the term I've used out in these parts is garbage can addict. Like I would just whatever was in there, I would take. I would do something to change the way I felt because consciously and subconsciously, I didn't like the way I felt. I didn't feel good. Just being. I didn't enjoy being. And so I wanted to change how I felt. And anything that worked, I would do to excess. Um, that was included video games, any type of other compulsive behavior, food, sweets, you know. Eventually it progressed, as addiction tends to do, to the point where I was, smoking crystal meth in hotel rooms and getting chemical burns in my mouth. And it just got really ugly. And luckily for me, this is another area where I feel very lucky, is that I had the resources to get the help that I needed. And I had the support from people in my life to do that, which a lot of people don't have. And is kind of another reason I wrote the book is because I want to add my voice to voices out there that support people who don't have other resources. If I can help guide somebody to the program who nothing else has clicked for them so far, then I feel like I've done my job. So, I was open with, the people in my life about how I was feeling, what I needed, and I started going to 12-step programs and started going to therapy. The therapy I went to was very bad. The therapist said to me, look, it's clear that this is not good for you. I'm not sure why you haven't stopped. I'm like, okay, well, you don't get it, so that's not going to work. And I started going to 12-step meetings, and I actually felt extremely at home. I wasn't. I was an atheist, agnostic. I wasn't militant. I don't still consider myself a militant atheist, but it didn't bother me that much. And I had plenty of people in the program telling me like, it's a higher power. It doesn't have to be God. Da, da, da. And that was okay for me for a while. And then and as I progressed in my recovery, it just I just came more and more face to face with the higher power deal and wanting to get into specifics about what is a higher power, what's my higher power, what role does my higher power play in my life. And I could sometimes finagle a definition of a higher power that, wasn't theistic and made sense to me. But then I would always, in conversation with other people in the program, I would always get nudged back towards a higher power that was very, monotheistic, sort of Judeo-Christian type God. So I would, I'd say, okay, my higher power is, a state of mind that I can achieve with the help of other people, and other resources. And they would say, okay, that sounds good. All right. Now, and then I would hear people say, and your higher power has to be loving. I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense with my definition. And then, turn it over to your higher power. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really, how do you do that with my definition of higher? It just never jived. And I always felt like I had to keep redefining my higher power to meet what other people were saying. And so eventually I was just like, this is not working for me. And so I stopped going to meetings, and I developed a pretty strong resentment towards meetings, and, was kind of passed it all off as uh, hogwash, whatever word you want to use. And so I stopped going to meetings, but I also didn't have any other type of self-improvement, self-help stuff going on, psychotherapy, anything like that. And eventually I just wanted to be like normal people, and I started drinking, and I, thought maybe this time I can drink normally. And I became obsessed with drinking normally. I would every day I'd be like, how am I going to drink normally today? And I'd be like, I'm going to have 3 drinks tonight. I can't wait to have my 3 and my life it, I heard someone say once, that if I could drink normally, I would do it all the time. And that was such a perfect description of what it was for me. Like I I I was like, yeah, I can drink normally now, so I'm going to do it every chance I get. It's just hardwired in me. If something feels good, if something is pleasurable to me, I want it all the time. Cuz why not? Cuz if it makes me feel better, then I should feel that way all the time. It just sort of is the way my brain is wired, and where I'll go despite negative consequences. So I hit bottom again pretty quickly. This time it was primarily with alcohol, and it was really bad. It got really bad really fast. Um, and so I was like, all right, I gotta get some help. I was fortunate again. This is another place where I got lucky. I was fortunate that I received some money through an inheritance and was able to pay for an inpatient rehab program, a fairly good one, not the super, not, no offense to anyone who's been in one of these, but not like the super resort type ones. It was a good intensive inpatient treatment where I learned about trauma, and I learned about grief and loss, and learned about all these other components that I don't feel were addressed fully in the 12 steps, um, and kind of poo-pooed as not that important. And I did that while also attending 12-step meetings. And some of the therapists in this program, I was just really blown away by. Um, I was blown away by their knowledge. I was blown away by how they made sense of things um, that previously sounded kind of like woo woo airy fairy stuff to me, or that didn't make sense to me. The way they could make sense of it in psychological common sense terms, and it made me want to become a therapist. And so I got super into therapy and psychology, and also got back into the 12-step program. But this time I sort of had support. I was in group therapy, I was in individual therapy, again, something I had the resources to do that many people don't. So again, a point of gratitude. um, I had the ability to be in these settings and find a way to just make the two work in my head. You know, I was able to sort of translate what a lot of people were saying. I felt more confident sort of in coming up with my own conceptions of certain, approaches and principles um, without having to give in to what other people believed or the way they were phrasing it. And so I kind of just developed my own understanding of the program that allowed me to still participate in it. And, I've been sober now 15 years and since that point. And I, a couple of years ago, I was like, I want to write a book about this. I feel like every time I hear the steps, I have like my own version, and I want to put it into writing, partially to help me really cement it in my own head and order it. And writing helps me figure out a lot of stuff too. It just helps me order my thoughts. And so I wrote the book in relatively short order, and because it's floating around in my head for many years, and it did really well. And it started slow, but as soon as people like Roger of AA Agnostica and those folk got a hold of it and started promoting it, which again, I'm very, very grateful for. It started to really sort of take off, and people started to email me and say that it was really beneficial. And still to this day, the best compliment that I can hear is that it made things make sense, because that's what I needed when I was in traditional 12-step world. Was I needed it to make sense to me. I needed it to fit my worldview and my understanding of reality. I didn't want to have to keep placing faith in these concepts or entities that I just didn't see personally evidence for. And I do believe that faith is a very powerful tool for a lot of people. And so I don't knock that approach at all. If somebody has profound faith in God and that keeps them sober, I have zero problems with that. I have zero judgment, zero problems. That's excellent. What I have a problem with is when they say, only God can get you sober. You have to do it this way. This is the only way. If you haven't figured this out yet, uh-oh. Like there's a big sort of like, ooh, you're going the wrong way, you're going down the wrong path, or you'll get it someday, or just keep praying to good and eventually one of the O's will fall off. Like there was this thing about like, if you just keep going, eventually you'll be one of us. Eventually your thinking will be right. And that just drove me nuts. Um, and so I wanted to provide an alternative. I wanted to provide something where it's like, here, this is also a way you can think about it. This is also a set of actions. This is how you can frame these actions. And if for those of you who've read my book, you know that the 12 steps that I use are not original. I didn't make them from scratch. They're very much like the previous 12 steps. They're just finagled a little bit to make more sense. I use the word finagled a lot, I'm realizing. They're just changed a little bit to make more sense for someone who doesn't believe in a supreme being. Um, and so, I just that's really what I'm the happiest about, is that it's helped people understand the program a little bit better and navigate their way through. And I by no means want to take away any traditional AA, but I want to provide an extra approach for people who need it, because as a therapist, I talk to lots of people who were struggling with addiction. And when I would suggest going to a 12-step meeting, very often the response was, oh, it's just so religious. There's so much God stuff, God this, God that. I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get it. And I can help you sort of navigate that stuff. So if you go to a meeting and you hear some stuff that just sounds bonkers to you, but everyone is saying it, come to me. I'll help you understand what they mean and sort of what I think the principle behind it, the psychological principle, the psychological um, process that's going on underneath that is, in my opinion. And so that's what the book is meant to be. Um, it's also really great because it reminds me of the stuff I need to be doing. I I read the book. I read the book sometimes as I'm editing it, or I'm working on a workbook right now, which is very slow going, but I'm hoping will come out this summer. Um, and I love writing this stuff because it reminds me. It's like, oh, that's a good idea, Jeff. You should really start doing that again. Um, which has been a great part of being a therapist and helping other people, is that it keeps reminding me of the stuff I need to be doing, which I don't do anywhere near perfectly. Um, but I still believe in, and I still see the benefits of when I do. So I feel like I'm kind of rambling right now, but that's basically the main story of me getting sober and my book. And I'm super grateful for what sobriety has given me. I don't have to believe in anything that I don't have tangible evidence for, and I still have a fantastic life. I have a wonderful relationship with my wife, who luckily is also sober and in program and works a killer Al-Anon program, which is helpful in many ways. And a beautiful daughter, and life is good. Life is stable, which I used to think was kind of boring. But now I'm a fan of boring, relatively. I still do things that are fun. I still have hobbies, and in fact, I think all that is an essential part of recovery. Enjoying life and having pursuits. Um, and so I'm grateful for what sobriety has given me, what the traditional program has given me, because if it wasn't for the traditional program, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So it still, holds a special place in my heart, and I don't, I don't poo-poo it. And again, anyone who's read my book, that it's not a bashing of the traditional approach or the traditional 12 steps at all, because that's not my intention. So, but the negative reviews on Amazon seem to think so. I love how many people give me 1 star and clearly have not read the book. People get very upset when you go against their worldview, which, I think only illustrates how needed the book is. People need permission, when other people come out with pitchforks and get mad at you for not, falling in line. It's nice to know that there are other options. So that's pretty much all I got in terms of my story. I'm much better at question and answer than I am at just talking about myself and talking off the cuff. So if you want to go ahead and transition into the Q&A portion of today's events.
That'd be awesome, Jeffrey. This is again Dan from Seattle, recovering alcoholic. So grateful to have you here. So appreciate your honesty and your candor, and just the way you share your approach. Um, I think before we start the formal questions, I'm going to ask Jeffrey if you're willing to kind of talk a bit about how you work the first 3 steps. If you're willing to do that, or if you'd rather we go straight to Q&A, we can do that. And when we do get to the Q&A, I'm going to read those in the order that I received them. And rather than me trying to edit what I think might be most appropriate out of those, I'm going to read the entire question, Jeff, and let you respond to that as you see fit, if that makes sense. So I would suggest doing the if you're willing to do the AA waltz, step 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Thanks.
Sure.
And then when you're done with that, whenever you want to be done with that, we'll go to the more formal Q&A. Thanks.
Um, Thank you. Good question. So for steps 1, 2, and 3, I'm doing in the workbook, I'm doing this right now. And so what I put at the end of every step is how do you incorporate this stuff into your daily life? Because for me, it does have to be a daily thing. But it's gotten to the point for me where it's pretty automatic. For me, steps 1, 2, and 3, I kind of jumble them together into, yep, I'm still an addict and I'm on the right track and I'm going to keep going. Right. So number one is, yeah, going back to using is not an option, not a good option for me. It's always an option. It's not a good option for me. Based on what I've seen, it will lead to this because it has and it always does. Number two is, I think if I continue on the path that I'm on, it will serve me well more often than the alternate path. Is step two. And step three is I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm committed to continuing along this path and continuing to pursue a healthy recovery lifestyle. And that, can vary day to day in terms of what that means. Maybe it depends on what's going on in my life, what might be out of balance, what I need to focus more on. Um, and so, yeah, that's basically how I do 1, 2, and 3. It's really become more of a solidified belief for me than it is any type of formal process that I do um, in the morning or anything like that.
Uh, Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to go ahead and start the questions now. Because of the wonderfulness of computers, it tells me who asked the first question first. And
Oh,
again,
cool.
rather than me editing anything, I'm going to just go back to the chat and start asking directly. And I'm going to do these one at a time, hopefully. So the first question is, and actually, I'm not going to say who it's from to keep it a little more anonymous. The first question is, I came to secular AA from traditional AA, and I no longer attend traditional AA meetings. The most difficult thing I've had to contend with in making the transition to secular AA is losing relationships with people who help me get sober, people I still care
Mm.
about. I've never found the right words to say to convince them that I'm still active in AA and I remain committed to 12-step recovery, but without the need to turn my will and my life over to a higher power. Have you had to deal with a situation like this, and how have you handled it?
That's a good question. I haven't, luckily. I haven't had the experience of not being able to continue relationships with the people I made relationships with in my original program. Now, keep in mind though, because of where I live in Southern California, which is a much less secular place, which is a much more secular place in general. And so I found a lot of people in my meeting, which is also a thing that I think helped me find my sort of way to do this without um, religious beliefs. So a lot of the people that I had made relationships with were not very, very strong into the God component of the steps. There are a few people um, who were, and they've expressed disagreement with some of what I've said, but we just don't really talk about that when we talk. But yeah, it is tough, and I can certainly see, especially depending on your location, depending on the culture of the meeting, it can be a really tough thing. And what I would suggest, if you want to hear my suggestion, is just to share your experience, strength, and hope, and share what your truth is. If your truth is that I am in this program and they don't, specifically mention God, but it still all makes sense and all the same bases are covered, and I'm still growing and I'm still addressing my relationships with myself and other people, and I feel fantastic in my life. And these are the fruits of the path that I'm taking. I think that's the best you can do. And they may, if they see that and that's threatening to them, that's a them problem, unfortunately. And it's sad. It's sad if somebody doesn't have an open enough mind to consider that there are other approaches. And really, in the traditional literature, that's written there too. We don't know everything. We realize we know only a little. And so someone who's really devoutly attached to the program should have that willingness to see, that there are other approaches, and that's okay. And, and it's not gonna you're not gonna corrupt them by being close to them. Like, they can have a relationship with you and still stick with their program, and that's okay. And if they can't do that, that's a them problem, and it's still sad, but it's not your responsibility to convince them that your way is good.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Next question is there any, as I said, I'll do these in the order received. Is there any, hang on a second. I have a brain cramp.
I get those.
There we go. Is there any ongoing translation of your book to Portuguese? If not, who should this person who asked the question contact to make that happen?
Yeah, geez. So I was shocked when someone in Russia reached out to me and was like, "We have a Russian. We translated your book into Russian." I was like, "Oh wow, that's amazing." And then I looked into, like, that's a good idea. Like, I should see about translating my book into other languages so that more people can access it. It is so expensive, and I I'm not quitting my day job because of this book. This book is not it's not like that. So it's really an expensive process. And so if people are willing to volunteer to do that, I'm happy to. I don't know how else to do it. If someone has more knowledge about the technical aspect, the logistics of getting that done, I'm all ears. um but unfortunately, it's been challenging. And then there's also the part of getting it published through Amazon, which is the only channel I use to publish right now. And then there's a lot of costs associated with it, unfortunately. And I am but a humble self-published author. So
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Next is, do you attend meetings?
I do occasionally. I don't as much as I would probably like to. I really felt more of a desire to, since seeing um, the secular community. That's the word I'm looking for. Because I had never spent any time in any secular meetings at all. I wasn't even really that aware that they existed until after I'd written the book. Um, so I still have very close relationships with a lot of people in. Oh, someone just left the meeting. I knew someone was going to leave the meeting as soon as I said I didn't go to a lot of meetings. I
Jeff,
knew.
that was against me. I'll take that one.
It's okay. It's funny how I can have 100 people. This is addict thinking, right? I can have 100 people come to see me talk, and one person leaves, and I'm like, oh, I'm a failure.
Yeah,
Um,
I have found for me that's a self-esteem issue for me. So I'm going to mute
it's,
myself and
it's,
let you share.
it's certainly, yes, it qualifies as a self-esteem issue. So anyway, um, I don't go to a ton. I go to some occasionally. The ones that I go to are generally smaller, sort of conversation types. You are free to disagree. I don't personally take to large meetings very well. I feel too self-conscious. A lot of it feels sort of performative. Like, I want the meeting to just get done so that I can meet with people afterwards and just talk. Like, I just like talking to people. I like having just an intimate, candid conversation with people about, what are you doing? How are you feeling? What's helping you today? Do you have any experiences that you want to share? So I've just never been a huge fan of meetings. And it's one of those other sayings that flies around the 12-step world a lot, which is like, I've never been to a bad meeting, people say, or I've never left a meeting feeling worse than when I came. And that's not true for me. I've been to, for me, what's helpful is having close relationships with people who are in recovery and who live a recovery lifestyle, who I can um, open up to and be close with.
Thank you. The next question is, well, apparently can't leave my chat on and talk to you at the same time, so I've got to double back here a minute.
Hmm.
It's just not going my way, you know. Hang on
Computers.
1 second. This one is you now get resentments in traditional AA, and I'm not clear if that's
Like,
I'll
like
just
if
read that.
like
Go
when
ahead.
I'm at a traditional meeting, do my eyes roll, sort of thing?
I'm
Yes,
not sure.
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, if that's the question, the answer is yes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's, you know, I think my approach is better for me. And so when I hear people pushing a certain thing for everybody, if someone's there and they're sharing, I got up and prayed this morning and it's just such a great way to start my day, that doesn't bother me, but it's again, it's the preaching of how other people need to do it, or like, our worst, that when they say one of my least favorites is our best thinking got us here. Right? It's like, don't tell me what my best thinking is, and my like that's silly though. Like that doesn't make sense to me. You're telling me that my thinking is not a tool that can be used at all. Like I need to completely abandon my thinking. So things like that, people who really really, I think, over interpret the powerlessness thing and apply it to absolutely everything. And, we have to run every thought by somebody else. We can't run our own lives. That kind of stuff. It starts to bug me, clearly. I don't say anything, I kind of want to live and let live, but yeah, that's tough to hear still.
Thank you. Yeah, I learned at these secular meetings that my best thinking keeps me here.
Mhm.
Next question is, what was it
Like
like for you when you first did step 4? What were the key things you learned about yourself?
Not much the first time. The first time I did step 4, um, it was so. First of all, step 4 is um, step 4 is a big deal. Like you are exposing every aspect of your life to another person, and then that person is analyzing it and breaking it down and helping you see patterns like that. There are people who go to school for a long time to learn how to do that kind of stuff. It's not an easy task, and it's very delicate and sensitive. And so when I first did the fourth step, he just put together a list of my character defects, basically, and it was very general. And um, I don't feel like I learned a lot about myself the first time I did it, but I did feel a tremendous sense of relief because it was the first time really I had. Um, I mean, obviously, I'm talking about step 5 also. I'm mushing them together, but it was the first time I had really talked to one person about everything. And so that sort of jettisoning of all my stuff was very, very cathartic and very helpful. So I did find it to be helpful, and writing it was really helpful too. Just sort of having that introspection, which I think is the self-reflection, mindfulness, I think is a huge part of recovery for me. And so it's sort of an exercise in sustained mindfulness with writing, with a lot of writing.
Thank you. Next is, of what value are the steps in general? Isn't it enough to simply stop drinking?
So that's a good question. I like that question. um, I'm a firm believer that addiction is a symptom. It's a symptom of something else. It's not the problem. If someone is addicted, there's other stuff going on, generally speaking. Are there exceptions to that rule? Maybe, probably. I don't know. I don't like to speak in absolutes ever. Um, but there's something else going on. And so, what I think is crucial, whether or not it's the steps or therapy or something, what I think is crucial is as fully as possible addressing whatever underlying stuff is pushing you to numb out and escape. So generally speaking, the experience of people who just stop and do nothing else is that they don't feel so great. They go back to the same mind state more or less, that they were in when they started using, and it's not terribly long lasting. That's not to say though that someone can't hit a bottom that's bad enough that, kind of changes their whole attitude, and they just go, I'm never doing this again. And I think it's possible. That's not what happened for me. Um, but yeah, I think it's possible. But in the vast majority of cases, no, I don't think it's enough to just stop using. And also, I mean, I that doesn't I'll speak for myself. That doesn't sound very fun. I would want to continue focusing on growing and learning more about myself, and improving the quality of my life anyway, you know. So
Thank you. Next question is regarding steps 6 and 7. I believe it's just more of a general. What are your thoughts on step 6 and 7 from your approach?
so steps 6 and 7 are some of my favorite steps in the big book. For anyone who's read the big book, it's like 2 lines, right? It's like it's that those are some of the most gaudy steps of all, because he's kind of doing it all. He, she, it's kind of doing it all, right? Like you get ready, and then you ask, and then something happens. I don't know. So for me, I like to make it a really active process of identifying what unhealthy character traits are. Okay. I have a spiel on this. Here's my spiel. So, um, I loathe the term character defects. I don't like it. And a big part of it is my bias as a therapist, because as a therapist, we have to be completely unconditionally accepting and all of that. But there's a reason therapists need to be unconditionally accepting, because we have to have the attitude of, everything somebody's doing, they're doing for a reason. They're doing for a reason. It makes sense. They aren't doing it because they're just have some demon or there's some rotten spirit. They're doing it for a reason. So these are character traits. In step 6 and 7, we in step 5, you uncover these character traits, hopefully with the help of a sponsor, and preferably the help of someone who's very good at doing step 5. You uncover these character traits that helped you at some point, almost certainly, right? Almost certainly there's some form, some defense mechanism, something that at some point served you growing up. So, if you think about selfishness, well, maybe you grew up in a household where your needs were not considered, where your parents had narcissistic qualities, and, you were more responsible for their feelings than you were for your own. And so you never had your needs met, and then you grew up to kind of be a little bit selfish and self-absorbed. And well, it makes sense that you did that because of how you grew up, and so it served you. But now that you're entering into the world and interacting with other people and trying to function, it's no longer serving you. It's out of balance, and it got knocked out of balance for whatever reason. And so it's more about an unhealthy character trait, or an unhealthy pattern of behavior and thinking, that needs to be brought more into balance. And so the way we address that in therapy is by setting goals, is by looking at what is the unhealthy character trait, what are actions that you can take that move you to the other end of the spectrum, because I believe every unhealthy character trait for the most part exists on a spectrum. Right? It's just, there's a middle ground. You can have, in terms of selfishness, you can be completely selfless, where you only care about other people and you neglect yourself, and you can be completely selfish to where you only care about yourself. And so for all of these character traits, it's about finding the healthy middle for you. And there's not one spot, it's a range for everybody, I think. And so, what are the behaviors that you can engage in on a regular basis, at first consciously, but then hopefully they become more habitual? What are the behaviors that you can engage in that will move you more towards balance, right? If you're a very selfish person and you don't do a lot for others, what's a way that, every day or every couple days you can incorporate some type of service or helping other people or being generous. Um, so
Great.
that's the way I sort of approach that one.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. The next question is, does Jeffrey think the clinical slash detox slash IOP world has held recovery hostage because they pretty much utilize only AA information in those agencies? And before you answer that, I'm going to predicate it with one of the hallmarks of this particular meeting, the SRG group, is that we don't discuss politics. So I'm going to ask you to address that through your clinical eyes or your AA eyes in general, and try to avoid the politics if you can in the way in which you answer that question.
I don't
I
know.
hope that wasn't too controlling.
No, no, I appreciate. It's good to set boundaries. I want to know what the culture. I don't want to say anything that's against the culture of the meeting. Um, I don't know that I have a very strong opinion on that. I think I don't know every inpatient program, and so I can't give you a general sense of how many of them are take this approach and how many take this approach. I think it really depends on the center and who the clinical director is and who the therapists are. I think the traditional 12-step approach is relied on very heavily in uh, outpatient programs. And to an extent, I understand that. And I still think that's probably the best approach in terms of meeting other people. So, in inpatient program, if I were to run an inpatient program, I would have them go to meetings. I would give them I wouldn't recite the steps at the inpatient place. The inpatient program would be about therapy and mental health and all the stuff that fuels addiction. But then I'd be like, you also got to meet some people that are on the same path as you, and really, AA or whatever traditional 12-step program, that's still the best. It's still the only game in town to an extent. I would make more options for, if there are, smart recovery meetings or different or secular meetings, I would absolutely be like, you can go here, but I would probably have people go to meetings. And I don't particularly like it when it infiltrates the actual treatment. So when it's just an extension of 12-step programs, but it's like a live-in residential 12-step program. I'm not a huge fan of that. I feel like there's so much more that needs to be addressed, and that can be addressed in an inpatient program. It's such a perfect opportunity to really get into stuff that's hard to address otherwise. So when it just becomes kind of an extension of the 12-step program, I don't think that's ideal.
Okay, thank you. Um, Next question is, how would you recommend educating newcomers about alternatives to big book slash traditional AA? In my experience, AA leadership is not interested in pursuing this.
No, no. I agree. They're not. Um, I don't know how to do that on a structural level and in a systemic kind of way. I don't know. My hope is that more people in traditional AA will become aware of secular approaches and pass that information along to newcomers when they
Okay.
come in. I just hope it'll be a more accepted, generally way of approaching recovery. So,
I'm gonna qualify that. I'm gonna qualify that question a little bit with, um, suppose I'm at a traditional meeting, and someone approaches me because they heard me share, and I may have mentioned about being an atheist or not believing in the higher power piece. How do you recommend that I educate that person, or any suggestions on how to help that person know that there are alternatives? In other words,
that there's
rather than a structural response, more of a one-on-one response.
Oh, okay. So how you would respond to an individual? Oh gosh, it really depends on the person. I mean, that's a tough situation.
Okay.
That's a tough situation. I think
Well,
I
that
think it really I think it really depends. I think if somebody said that, if somebody were to approach me, I feel very comfortable in saying, oh, that doesn't work for me. That's not the approach I'm taking. I'm taking an approach that works. You know, great. Thank
okay.
you. I have a
Great.
cell
Thank
phone.
you.
I have a cell phone plan that meets my needs. Thank you. I don't. need you to offer any new ones. It's kind of like
Thank you.
someone trying to sell. Yeah.
Yeah, we're asking you these tough questions because we're paying you big bucks. So here, let me qualify that snarky comment. Jeffrey is here on his own accord as I'm assuming as a service position for recovery, but we are not paying him. He's doing this voluntarily. So I want to be real clear about my joke. Maybe the joke fell in not good ears, my bad ears. So anyway,
I
enough of
thought it
my
was funny.
babbling. The next one is, did you write the workbook PDF that's circulating online? And
No.
if not, what is your impression of it?
So when it comes to things like piracy and derivative works, I take it as kind of a compliment, and I take it as kind of a challenge too, like because I'm writing a workbook and this person wrote the workbook way faster than I wrote it, and it's pretty good. The thing is with my work, it just challenges me to make a better workbook when I release mine. My workbook has more, it's more talky. Like there's paragraphs, there's more to read. Like it explains things, and it's my voice telling people, what I think this approach means, and da da da. The workbook that's circulating is just questions, just actual work to do, which I think is great. And to be fair, the person did reach out to me and ask if it was okay before she wrote that workbook, and I said, yeah, go for it. Just don't claim that it's official, and don't sell it. Don't make money off of it or whatever. Um, but it's to me, when I search on Google, staying sober without, and the second search is staying sober without God PDF. So people trying to download my book without paying for it. It's kind of flattering. Yeah, I feel like that's a sign of success if my book is being, you know, and also it's the kind of book that, like, if somebody needs it and they can't afford it, I'm not going to hold a grudge against them for getting it for free. I want it. I'd much rather somebody have it than not have it because they can't afford it.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question is, and I am gonna edit this one a little bit. Hi Jeffrey, a friend of mine read your book and loved it. He is also in OA, and it inspired him to write a book for overeaters who don't believe in God. I would love to connect with you too. Can you email me at da da da? So my question is, if you're okay with me sending you that person's email and you responding, let me know yes or no. If you don't want to, I won't. I'm good either
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And you can all reach me at jeff@practicallysane.org. That's my email address. I'm happy to receive emails from anybody.
So that was again Jeff at practicallysane.org.
Correct.
Okay, so the person that asked that question, rather than me being in the middle, I'm going to ask you to directly contact Jeff, and then you two can connect without me being in the middle.
Oh, they're
See, therapy.
contacting me.
See, therapy did teach me some things.
Yes, we call that detriangling. Very
There
good.
you go, exactly. So the next question is, did you draw on other quote alternative steps, close quote, for example, humanists, at least two that call themselves proactive, etc., when coming up with the practical 12? Any thoughts on other resources in addition to your own work that were helpful to you?
Honestly, no, I didn't. I wanted it to be my own thing. I wanted it to be original. Um, I did look at some alternative stuff. I didn't want to copy anybody inadvertently, but I didn't. I felt very clear, which is why I wanted to write a book. It all just felt very clear in my head. Like this is my concept of it, and it makes sense to me, and hopefully it'll make sense to somebody else. So no, not really. For a couple things in the book, I did some research. Like there's a paragraph or two or three in there about, will I always be an addict? And there I wanted to cite some actual research and stuff like that. So I did some outside research there and stuff. But no, I just kind of, it came out of my brain mostly, which is, it's one interpretation.
Great, thank you. Um, I'm going to make another housekeeping announcement here in terms of typically this meeting is 1 hour formal meeting, and then we're open for another half hour informal. And I believe for the sake of your presentation and your being here, Jeffrey, this is going to be a 90-minute meeting. So I would encourage folks who want to hear more about Jeffrey and his response to the questions to stay for the full 90 minutes. I hope that
By,
made
by the
sense.
way, thank you to Prism for, I just saw the definition of finagle. I will not use that word anymore. Obtained by devious, dishonest means.
Ooh, yeah, that's not you.
I'm not going to do that. I know I'm
No,
not
that is not you.
from henceforth, from this day forward, I shall not finagle. Yeah.
The next question is, are you considering a second edition to your book based on feedback you've gotten? What do you think you got wrong? What I really liked what you got right was exercise, nutrition, non-traditional AA self-care things that a lot of us learn from therapists or sponsors, but I think your book nailed that wonderfully. So the question again, are you considering a second edition based on feedback you've gotten? What do you think you got wrong?
Um, I didn't get anything wrong because I no, I'm kidding. I think there's always room for improvement. I am considering a second edition. So I have a couple things in the works, and I have been in grad school. I'm actually studying to become a speech pathologist on top of a marriage and family therapist. And so I've been in grad school and been just completely overwhelmed and haven't really had the time to do a lot of the work that I want to be doing. But I'm graduating in August and I'm going to be done, and then I'll have a job and actually be able to do stuff on the side. And so I want to do the workbook, and then I want to make an audiobook. Making an audiobook is also very expensive, and a publisher reached out to me and wanted to publish it, and it was a very bad deal. And I want to do it myself. I want my own voice. And so I'm going to probably end up recording it in my closet in a self-made audio recording booth. But I got some stuff to do first, and then I do want to wrap around and do the second edition. I would like to add, for whatever reason, I wasn't a big fan of reading stories like in the back of the AA Big Book. It didn't do much for me. I liked hearing stories, but a lot of people seem to benefit from reading stories. So I would like to maybe add some stories to the back, so people can just get more specific examples of how. So if anyone wants to send a story, I'm happy to add it and remove all identifying information from it. But yes, Dan,
Okay, no, I just was sorry.
I heard
I
you
made
inhale.
I forgot I did. I'm keeping the mute open because that leaves my chat open at the same time. If I mute myself while you're
Okay, I
answering,
just wanted to make
it
sure
turns my
I was giving you a
no,
chance to talk.
I'm yeah, no, it's all good. Were you finished with that now that I so really inhaled loudly?
No, almost. Hold on, let me just think. What else was I going to say? I was talking story. Oh, and there are just some things that I would probably like to expand on a little bit more. Maybe just add some rewording, rephrasing to make it a little bit more clear. Um, uh, yeah, nothing glaring that I feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't put this in. Um, Maybe some more resources, maybe some updated research, things like that.
Okay, great. And then another question, can you talk in general about how your secular approach to step 6 and 7, how they came about and how you do that?
It's really based largely on like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sort of just changing your thoughts and beliefs, distorted thoughts and beliefs about things, and trying to uh, address. I don't want to use the psychobabble here, but just trying to address erroneous thinking by engaging in more reality-based thinking, changing behavior just through different behavior, acting as if type stuff. So, I mean, that was really just a lot of it's just behavioral, just cognitive behavioral therapy approach, which is just you want to think different than, then challenge your distorted thoughts. And if you want to behave differently, start engaging new patterns.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me next question. And again, thank you all for the questions and your attentiveness and great questions and some wonderful answers. Next question is, thank you for the book, and it was a godsend, irony intended, by the questioner. Although I was really annoyed that you gently suggested honesty as a first core value. That made me frustrated because I was lying about everything. Did you find
Mhm.
it as difficult a challenge as I have?
The honesty part of it.
Yes.
Um, I'm. This was another thing where I think I'm a little bit lucky. Is I also have OCD, which I'm is treated, but it's not perfect. I still struggle with it. And one of the things that's common for individuals with OCD, and is certainly true for me, is I have a really guilty conscience. Like I sometimes feel guilty about, things that aren't really, I didn't really do anything wrong, but there will be some times where I feel guilty for things I didn't even do. Like it's a really intense sort of sense of guilt. So I'm very pushed towards confession. Um, so in terms of honesty, that came a little bit easier to me. What was really hard, the hardest part of the honesty was being honest about my experience and my feelings and my thoughts, and being honest with myself about what my motivations were, what I wanted, um, being honest with myself about my behaviors and whether they were helping me or not helping me. That was the tougher part of it, was really being brutally honest. But it's also just so crucial. I think it's one of the most important. There's a really good book, it gets a little philosophical, but there's a really good book by Sam Harris called Lying. And he talks about, just in general, how um, there's almost zero instances where being dishonest results in a better outcome. And so I really am kind of an extremist when it comes to the topic of honesty. And that doesn't necessarily mean being transparent. And that doesn't necessarily mean sharing things with people that aren't safe or that it's none of their business. You can be honest and say, I don't feel comfortable sharing that. That's honesty. So you can still have boundaries and be honest. But the dishonesty, and it's just for me, it's the most corrosive thing to my recovery.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. How many meetings a week do you attend?
What's this question again?
Yeah.
Why am I being grilled? I feel judged.
Oh, you know what? That did come up before. My bad. Sorry. Let's go to the
It's
next
okay.
question then.
So I'm just
My
teasing.
bad. Sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to read all these questions and then say them in order. And
I don't regularly attend meetings.
I heard that earlier. Sorry. Thank you. Like I said, this is a lot of moving parts for me.
No,
So,
it's fine. It's fine. I'm
um,
teasing.
and I think as long as we just stay with the way we're doing, we're okay. So let me go to the next question. Uh, Once you let go of the God approach, how important do you think it is? Let me back that. Let me rephrase that. Sorry. Uh, my mouth got ahead of my brain again. Once you let go of the God approach, how important do you think is the fact that it takes 12 steps? It seems like first recovery is not completely sequential and really not linked to 12 ideas. There are many.
Great question. Great question. So I wanted the book. So I have further down the pike, I have an idea for a different book, which is just a more general approach to recovery that doesn't mirror the 12 steps. The reason I kept it at 12 steps was because I wanted people who are in 12-step programs to have an easy transition, to have something that mapped onto their current, their current environment well. So I wanted it to be for people who were specifically going to 12-step meetings. No, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything magical about 12 steps. I think there's a bajillion different ways you can divide up the process. I think the process is different for everybody. I think for some people, certain steps might come before others. I think it's very individual. But also, if I'm putting out a book that's supposed to be, to an extent, a cookie cutter approach, there does have to be a universal structure to it. But yeah, I don't think there's anything sacred or special about the 12 steps. It's just about there being 12 steps. I think there's a lot of different ways you can frame the process.
Great, thank you. There's some questions that are a little bit um, redundant of prior questions, so I may not be. For the people that sent me a direct message, if there's any resentments about what I did or didn't ask, I just added my email address to my name, so feel free to send me a note if you feel the need to do so. Um, Next question is, were you raised religious, strict or not? What aspect of that religion's HP turned you off the most?
Hmm. That was another area where I was lucky. I was not indoctrinated. My Mom and dad were both very minimally religious. My mom is Jewish, and it was more just she's kind of an agnostic Jew, more culturally Jewish, and then my dad was a very lukewarm Christian. So he believed in God and would mention him sometimes, him, her, it, sometimes, but it wasn't really pushed on me. So I was fortunate for
Okay,
that.
thank you. Um, Next question. You mentioned a quote recovery lifestyle, close quote. Other than being sober, what does that mean to you?
Oh man. Yeah, well, it's a great question. It's essentially living according to the principles, living a life according to your values. And if that means, that means honesty, relationships, things like that. It's self-improvement, growth, um, and it's going to look different for everybody, but it generally involves a healthy lifestyle, which means a lifestyle that's full and um, that doesn't that's not self-destructive and that doesn't cause harm to you and to other people. And that's
Okay.
that's
Oh,
pretty much it.
sorry.
And that is conducive to staying sober.
Great. Thank you. Next question. Have you encountered what could be called fundamentalist AA? I've been to meetings that are dominated by one old timer or a small group of them. They use the big book like conservative Christians use the Bible, and they
Oh yeah.
discourage newcomers from thinking for themselves at all. So I'm going to tack another question to that, and that is, if you have encountered that, how do you approach that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of that. I just sort of not smile and nod, and I don't engage. I'm not going to get into a debate. I'm not going to get into a theism debate with them. But yeah, and it's. I mean, it's just like with any fundamentalist. It's with any sort of dogmatic belief system. It's when you meet someone who is devout, it's a little scary and intimidating, and you kind of just have to, okay, all right. You have to just sort of let them have their beliefs and let them have their way of approaching things, and just, I'm not gonna start. Sometimes I'm in the mood. Like sometimes I'm like, somebody come at me with some religious stuff. I'm ready to debate. I like to debate. So I'm maybe more willing to do that than some people, but you do not owe anybody an explanation for your for your recovery and the way that you're approaching your recovery. You don't owe anybody an explanation. It's not your job to convince anybody that your way is appropriate. So yeah. But yeah, I've come to that a lot. I mean, people who just carry the big book around with them, and all the pages are worn and like falling out, and it's like their Bible. And I think that's a little bit, I think that's dangerous.
Next question is, does being Jeffrey Munn keep you out of secular meetings?
Um, no, I don't know. Well, the thing is, so the only secular meetings I've been to, honestly, are secular meetings I've been invited to as Jeff Munn. Like, hey, Jeff Munn, you're Jeff Munn, come to our secular meeting. And so I'm going there with the knowledge that people are going to be looking to me as sort of a different, as, as someone special. I don't know, as a VIP, whatever. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. I guess I'm under the assumption that if I went to a secular meeting, I don't think I'd be recognized.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, Next question. Do you have, well, there's two back to back from different people, but I'm going to consolidate it. Do you have a sponsor, and how do you feel about sponsorship?
Oh, love this question. I love this question. I don't have a sponsor. I have multiple people that I go to for guidance and support if I'm struggling in my recovery. A lot of different people, and it depends on the issue. I have some people that are really good to talk to about some stuff, and some people that are really good to talk to about other stuff. And it depends on what problem I'm having. Sponsorship is not something everybody is cut out to do. I think sponsorship is often framed as this just inevitable place that someone should end up on their path of service to others. Like eventually you will be sponsoring other people. And I genuinely believe that there are some people that should never sponsor somebody else. And that's not a judgment of them. It's a skill set to be able to hear somebody, to be able to, and obviously my training as a therapist biases me here a little bit, but to be able to hear somebody, to be non-judgmental, to not say, something that could potentially be damaging, to, know when they're talking about something that may require a higher level of care. There's so many reasons that, it's just not, in my opinion, a good idea to rely solely on one person for overall recovery. For working the steps specifically, I think a sponsor is really important. I think it's important to, if you have multiple sponsors teaching you how to work the steps, you're going to get pulled in different directions, and the steps are going to, someone's going to tell you to work it this way, someone's going to tell you to work it the other way. There's a chance you can play one against the other, whatever. It's the same reason we don't encourage anyone to have two therapists. Because if someone's responsible for guiding you in a certain area, it's best to just have that one person that you trust. But a lot of people treat sponsors as though they are just your overall, they should be your life guide, your one and only source of information, which again, sorry, I'm getting I'm getting worked up. Which again is, it's interesting to me that it's the same people who will say, you know, don't trust your thinking. Your thinking is always bad. Your thinking is always wrong. But yet the same person who can't trust their own thinking is going to tell you exactly what you need to do in every situation that you encounter in your life. So their thinking is not good for them, but for you, it's perfect. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And so what I want to find, what I think is important for sponsorship is for somebody to have worked the steps in a way that works for them, and for them to be able to guide you through that. This is how I work the steps. This is what I did. That's their scope of competence and their scope of practice, as far as I'm concerned, is what have you done? Show me what you did. If it works, awesome. If it doesn't, I can try something else. But don't tell me, unless you are a marriage counselor, don't tell me what to do in my primary relationship. Don't tell me when I can and can't start dating. That's not your area of expertise.
Great.
We don't even do that as marriage and family therapists. We don't even do that. We don't tell people you can't date, you can't this, you can't that. It's like it's really something else to tell somebody that, and to, to take somebody who is so trusting and so vulnerable, and and give them these absolute rules about what they should do. And that's I think it can sometimes be very damaging. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you practice meditation?
Oh God,
Did you
not
say
an
God?
sorry, gosh, golly, not enough, not enough. I love meditation. It is by far the most helpful tool for me, and I do not do it enough. I try to maintain a daily practice. What I do is I practice mindfulness throughout the day. And the way I do that is just by, I learned this through Eckhart Tolle, who has his own, he's hit or miss sometimes, but he's got a lot of really good stuff. And I read his book, The Power of Now, and one of the practices he talks about is just bringing your awareness into your body while you're doing something. So keeping a portion of your awareness in your body, like, you can, if you pause, you can bring attention into like your hand, like just take a moment and imagine and notice that your hand exists, right? That's mindfulness. You're just bringing attention inward. I feel a lot of my emotions physically, like I get a lot of chest tension and stuff like that. So I take time throughout the day to look inward, and just kind of get a sense of what's going on, and make sure I'm present and not on autopilot and stuff like that. In terms of formal sitting practice, it's been a struggle for me, but I need to do it. I need to do it, and I want to do it every day. And I think for me, 20 minutes every day changes my life, changes how I react to people, changes how long an emotion will stick with me when it arises. changes. It just changes a lot. Changes how likely I am to eat that donut that's on the counter at work. It really impacts my life. So I need to do more of it.
I'm gonna cut you some slack here. I know raising my two kids, I had lots of great intention to meditate, but sometimes changing a diaper takes precedence.
Yes.
Next is another question. My biggest issue with AA is the instruction to turn my will over. This strikes me as a dangerous thing. What am I really turning over my will to? What do you think of this phrase?
Yeah, the whole thing about turning your will over is a difficult one for me. I don't know what to make of that one, other than the way I think of it. When someone says turn your will over, it's just, don't act purely on your impulses. Be open to other direction, be open to other ideas. It comes from mindfulness. It's being able to observe your thoughts and your impulses and your desires, and not let them immediately take the driver's seat and dictate your behavior. So you're just not letting them completely control you. That to me is what I'm doing when I'm turning my will over. I'm not just acting purely on my lizard brain and what it wants to do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next question. Do you have any commentary regarding suggestions for protection of women in the rooms? And I might add
Mm.
other vulnerable people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, stick with, yeah, it's a tough one too, because a lot of people who are early in recovery don't know what a safe person looks like, and are magnetically drawn to unsafe people because it's familiar. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where I think there's a huge place for women's only meetings, and specific meetings for, and even there are people who can be predatory and take advantage. um, I think it's really important for someone to I think it's important for there to be good education about how to stay safe in the 12-step world, in any, really, in any situation. Like, I mean, if you go to any job, they give you training. I mean, depending on where you live, but they give you trainings on harassment and things like that, and boundaries, and what's okay and what's not. I feel like to an extent there should be some aspect of that at every, at every meeting, but who's gonna, that's not practical to implement. But I don't know, maybe, do some meetings have
Uh,
pamphlets or something that at least goes into that type of stuff? There should be.
yeah, I don't think there were. I will make an editorial comment. Uh, in my home group, we actually announced that at the beginning of the meeting, that because it ends at night and it's down near the waterfront in Seattle, that if anybody needs another female or a couple of guys and sober a long time, to walk them to their car to let us know after the meeting
Mhm.
that we want people to stay safe. So it
Yeah,
became part of our meeting culture.
yeah,
But that's only one meeting. I know there's other problems at other meetings as well.
yeah. I mean, and I've seen some meetings try to address it by like having a separate men's phone list and women's phone list, and but obviously it's not that simple, right? I mean, there's it's more than just separating men from women.
All right.
Uh,
Next question. If addiction is a symptom, can one then become a normal drinker if one sorts out your psychological problems?
I talk about this in the book. I would never say it's impossible. Um, could it happen? Has it happened? Maybe. Sure. I mean, if someone undergoes some really intensive therapy and deals with underlying trauma, and really just changes a fundamental, their fundamental way of engaging with the world, and managing their emotions, I think it's possible. The other thing, though, is that it's those those pathways that have been created in your brain, those pleasure reward pathways, they don't just go away. Once a person has learned that this provides me tremendous relief, and this is an option when I'm feeling stress, when I'm feeling whatever, I think you can't erase those pathways, and it's very easy to fall back into it. And no matter what healing you've done, once you're back into that cycle, I think it'll take you back in. I mean, that's been my experience. That's what I see happen often. There are people though that I know who claim on Facebook to be using, they were addicts before and now they're, they smoke weed every once in a while, have a drink now and then, and life is, I guess, manageable. And so I'm not going to, message them and be like, you're full of shit. Show me more pictures. But, like, um, yeah, it's not something. I have changed significantly in recovery in terms of my values and the way that I process my emotions. I recently had surgery and they gave me opiates, and I was like, yeah, I'm just going to give it a try. It's doctor prescribed. I'm going to see. It's been 15 years. I'm just going to see if this helps. I took it, and the first thought I had when it hit me was, I wish I had taken two. I told my wife, I'm like, throw those out now, throw them away. And she luckily did that for me. And so it's like once that part of my brain is woken up, it is back. It's just back and it's ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm gonna answer that question as well. In my 35 years of my career, which I won't get into because this is about you and your talking. But I do want to say, I heard you say in your share that when you started to drink again, and I wrote it down to quote it in my own mind because it reminded me of something. And what you said is, and I thought maybe I could start drinking normally.
Mm-hmm.
And what triggered me about that was, and I thought, now that was your word. My sponsor would say, as he told me, that thought, that's the mental illness part of alcoholism. That
Mm-hmm.
thought that now I can control my drinking. And I almost read a piece out of the chapter 3 of the big book about more about alcoholism, about the great obsession of the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is the ability to control and enjoy their drinking. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I tend to agree with you. Maybe it's possible if people address their underlying stuff, but I really highly doubt it. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's possible.
And
Um,
at this point, the question I have to ask myself is why. If
yeah,
I'm like, what at this point, why? Why take that risk? If I'm willing to take that risk for a drink, that's already a sign that I care too much about drinking. I've already
right.
crossed the line. If I
Good
think
point.
that's, it's at this point, it's just doesn't
Good
make
point.
sense.
We have time for a couple more questions, and there's a couple of really good ones left here as well. So, do you consider alcohol? This is not my question from the one of the members here. Do you consider alcoholism a disease,
Mhm.
a coping mechanism, or a combination of both?
I call it a condition. I don't like getting to it's a behavioral mental condition. I think disease just has a lot of different interpretations of it. So I shy away from. I'm not saying it's not a disease. I'm not saying it is a disease. I just think that's not the word I choose because I think it's got certain connotations. Technically, if you look at the medical definition of a disease, is it? I don't maybe. I don't know. I don't like getting too caught up in semantics. It's a condition. It's a state of being mentally and behaviorally that is a cycle and can't just be switched off through willpower.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. Uh, do you think you may have oversimplified step 11 by reducing the practical version to started to meditate? Doesn't reading inspirational literature and doing contemplation belong there too, such as a more focused intention? I think part of this you addressed before, but that's a more detailed question.
Um, sure. I think that could be incorporated in that too. Yeah. I think there's more that could be incorporated into step 11. Um, I think there are things you can add to it that would enhance it. I don't think it's the be all end all, but in terms of all the different spiritual practices that I've done, which is not all of them by any means, um, I have found specifically mindfulness meditation to be the most beneficial. Um, I this is going to be It's going to sound strange, but I understand and believe in the power of prayer, not in that any external being is acting on my prayer or hearing my prayer. But even in Buddhism, they have Buddhist prayer, and they don't necessarily believe in a deity. And there's something about the expression, the verbal expression of intentions, that is healing and has a psychological impact. Like if you've ever been in the car or wherever talking to yourself about something that happened, there's something about verbalizing experiences. Same with writing, that has a place and can be beneficial. And so I think there is a place for prayer. I didn't have the guts to put it in my book, Staying Sober Without God. I was worried it would just be one of those, because I imagine a lot of people who are finding my book are doing, really like, oh, finally something that's not going to mention anything even remotely religious. So I didn't know if there was a place for prayer in there, but I do think it can be. I do think the expression of intentions and, speaking out loud and stuff. I think there's a utility to that. And other practices such as, different types of contemplative practices, reading inspirational stuff. Sure, I think there's a place for that. And, you know if there's a way that I can, you know I wouldn't make it part of the step where I say, you have to meditate and read spirit, because that might not be for everybody. So again, I have to make it as general and as applicable to everybody as possible. And the one thing that I think everybody can benefit from, pretty much without question, is some sort of mindfulness, introspective practice.
Thank you. Um, uh, it's hmm, we have about 7 minutes left of the meeting itself, so I've got just a few more questions. I want to try to get through all of them. Um, what do you think about us secular people going back to traditional AA and outing ourselves as being secular, purposely to help others?
I think that's great. I think that's excellent. And I think that, it depends on how it's done. It can be done in a way that's, hostile and confrontational. But I think if you're just sharing, like I said earlier, if you're just sharing your experience, strength, and hope, and you're not going, I'm an atheist, neener, 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 but you're sharing your experience, strength, and hope, and saying, hey, I found secular meetings and that works for me. I'm not saying it's the only way, but I was a little turned off by the God, higher power stuff. And so, I'm doing this, and it's really helped me. That could save someone's life, I think.
Mhm.
That could be the one time somebody hears in a meeting, like, oh my gosh, there's another path. You mean I don't have to sit here and wrestle with my own definition of a higher power. um so I think that's a great thing to do. But again, respectfully.
Great, thank you. What is your view on people having, say, a minimum of 5 years or more sobriety before they start sponsoring? If you've raced through the steps in a few months, can you be ready to sponsor just because you got to the end?
It depends on
I think you talked about this a little bit earlier too.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by sponsoring. If you've gone through the steps and you feel like you have a good grasp of what you did and you can show that to somebody else, then fine. You sponsor somebody as soon as you're done with the steps. But don't go beyond what you know and what your experience is. Stay in your lane. Which everybody, I think, is true for everybody. I mean, that's one of the things that's hammered into our heads as therapists, is stay in your lane. Don't give people medical advice. As a therapist, I'm not telling people what to do with their diet and stuff like that. That's for a dietitian to do. So I think everybody, it's also a sign of wisdom and recovery to know what you know and know what you don't. And it's important to not go beyond that. So yeah, the any of the rules of thumb, I am suspicious of. So like, wait a year before dating. Like, I know people who they need to wait 15 years before they start dating. And then I know people who, manage to, dating's not a huge problem for them and they can date early on and whatever. I think it's highly individual. So I don't particularly like those black and white rules.
Excellent, thank you.
And
Um,
again, sorry to interrupt, but
no, go
again, with
ahead.
sponsoring, like there could be, yeah, waiting until you are a little more well versed in recovery to sponsor. I think that's a fine idea. But what makes 5 years? What does that mean? What happens at 5 years? You know, um, there are people who can sponsor way before that, and there are people who should not sponsor after 20 years.
Okay. Uh, and the last question that's listed here, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'm going to ask it as it says here. What about addressing the ritual of getting, having, and partaking in the alcohol slash drug of choice while practicing recovery? I'm assuming that means you're in recovery, but you can use now and then. I think is what that means,
Oh,
which in my mind isn't recovery, but the question,
well, again, the question I have there is, why? Why are you doing that? Why, you know, how about considering 90 days of nothing? If that is not something you're willing to do, that in and of itself should be a red flag. But like, why are you so hooked onto this? Like, why is this thing so important to you? Allegedly, or presumptive, presumably, that's the word I'm looking for. Presumably, you entered recovery because, life was getting pretty gnarly for you. And so, why, given how bad life got for you, are you still defending occasional use of this right now? Like, why not at least just give it a shot for a certain period of time and see what happens? So I would explore the motivation there and see if I could maybe point out someone's um, cognitive dissonance there, like where maybe you're kind of lying to yourself. Um, I think also one another thing I heard with that question though is just like engaging in the rituals without actually using. So I'm thinking of like somebody kicking their feet up at the end of the day and drinking a non-alcoholic beer or something like that is sort of what I got from that question, and that might be a misinterpretation. But I think that's a slippery slope for a lot of people because the in terms of behavior, the neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you're doing a lot of stuff that's associated with the previous behavior, it's more likely, I think, to lead to that behavior. Is that always the
no,
case? No, of course not. But I think that's a general rule.
Jeffrey, now that you said that, that was not how I saw the question, but after you shared that, yeah, I think that's what the question was about. What do you do about that ritual piece of it in recovery? And I think you answered that nicely.
I think it's
Um,
great to create new rituals, new soothing
yes,
rituals that are very different. Putting on music, certain lighting, whatever, you can have rituals, and rituals are extremely powerful for people. I think, rituals and tradition is a big place for that, just sort of in our genetics. It really works for us. So
great. Outstanding. We're about at the end. I want to turn it over to Courtney for just a moment, but briefly, thank you so very, very much. That was just spectacular. I so appreciate you being here with us. Yeah, I guess
thank
people
you
can,
all.
yeah, people are applauding. There you go. Um,
Thank you guys so
ex
much. It's a
Excellent.
pleasure to talk to you all.
And Courtney, if I'm going to ask a housekeeping question as well, this has been recorded, and I'm going to ask you where you're going to post that. And Courtney, if you would please, any kind of summarizing comments you want to make, that'd be awesome.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Jeffrey for being here today, and we certainly appreciate it so much to have you personally with us and with our group. And this group has taken secular recovery per se very, very seriously. And we use a group conscience, and we have gathered together as a group of secular people to promote recovery without all the other stuff that goes on in traditional meetings that tends to block true recovery or blocks independent thought. And you've explained yourself very, very wonderfully. A lot of our people in the meetings use your text, and so it was great to hear from you personally. And thanks again for that. We have recorded this, and the recording will be, it takes a little while to process this length of time of recording. So after it processes, probably the rest of the afternoon, it will take, it's being processed in the cloud. We will post by tomorrow, we will be able to announce where there's a link that people can watch this. And so we'll post that on our website. We'll post it on our Facebook page, which is Secular Recovery Group on Facebook. It's easy to find, just say that. Facebook.com groups, Secular Recovery Group. We're right there. So we take care of a lot. And for anybody who, we did have a couple of people who got on our Facebook page and tried to get in the meeting, and we opened up for all of those, and we got everybody in plus a couple. So with the exception of one person who requested to get back in because their power went out, we didn't get them back in. We lost them, so maybe their power continued to stay out. Anyway, thanks so much, Jeffrey, and I'll turn it back to Dan. And again, and thanks very much to Bruce, who was very instrumental in this, our good friend and also in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. And with that, that is the end of this meeting. Again, Jeffrey, thank you so very much, and thank you all for being here and for your great questions. Thank you
Thank
much.
you guys
Bye
so
now.
much. Please feel free to reach out if you need.
Thanks, Jeff.